Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Here we will discuss psychology, its history and various ideas through different perspectives. Welcome to Psychology by Viv. Let's begin, shall we? So today we shall discuss psychology's history. Psychology itself is a relatively new science, but its roots date back to ancient times. Many cultures, people and eras have contributed to the study of human behavior, mainly the Egyptians, Greeks, Chinese, and others. So let's move to the early or prehistory. Most of the early history is either from psychological experiments or by literary works that hinted at or described human psyche and motivations behind various behaviors. So as mentioned before, the video will emphasize on 1. The Egyptians, 2. The Greeks, 3. The Chinese. First of all, the Egyptians. The Egyptian approach to what modern society terms psychology was deeply intertwined with religion, magic, and a holistic view of the body, mind, and soul. Rather than separating mental processes from the physical body, they perceived the individual as a composite of multiple parts, including the heart, seat of intelligence, the ka, spiritual double, and the ba, personality. Key aspects of the ancient Egyptian view. The heart. As the center of cognition, Egyptians believed the heart, ib, not the brain, was the seat of emotion, thought, memory, and morality. It was considered the center of a person's being and was preserved during mummification, while the brain was often discarded. Consciousness of the heart. This concept relates to an innate knowledge of the universe, often linked to a deeper awareness of the inner world and its connection to the divine. Polypsychism is the philosophical and psychological concept that a single human mind or body contains multiple souls, distinct consciousnesses, or subpersonalities. It posits that the self is not a single, unified entity, but rather a cluster of semi-autonomous mental elements, or multiple voices. Key aspects of polypsychism include historical, spiritual context, the belief, dating back to at least the 1850s, that an individual has multiple souls. Psychological definition. The theory that the mind is a collection of subpersonalities, a dialogical self, with competing, often opposing, voices. Plurality, multiplicity. It is closely related to modern concepts of plurality, or being plural, where individuals identify as having multiple people occupying one body. The Ebers Papyrus, circa 1550 BCE, is one of the oldest and most comprehensive medical documents from ancient Egypt, and it holds significant, early relevance to the history of psychology and psychiatry. While it primarily functions as a medical text, it demonstrates a surprisingly early holistic understanding of the connection between physical health and mental, emotional states. Key aspects of the Ebers Papyrus related to psychology include the Book of Hearts and affective disorders. The papyrus contains a dedicated section known as the Book of Hearts, which links mental and emotional states to the heart, rather than the brain. It includes descriptions of conditions recognized today as depression, dementia, and severe sadness, melancholy, descriptions of mental distress. The text documents mental health issues with language that closely resembles modern clinical descriptions, such as the mind in the heart which goes up and falls down, likely referring to mood swings or anxiety. The mind kneels, his heart in its place. His heart becomes wary, he eats little and is fastidious. often interpreted as symptoms of depression. His mind is drowned, indicating extreme forgetfulness or confusion. The heart as the center of emotion. Unlike modern psychology, which locates mental processes in the brain, ancient Egyptian medicine deemed the heart, Ib, as the seat of emotion, memory, and thought. Holistic treatment approaches. The Ebers papyrus blends empirical treatments, herbal remedies, with magical spells, incantations, to treat mental ailments. Treatments for sadness of the heart or emotional distress included remedies designed to restore balance between the mind and body, channel theory, and mental state. The Egyptians believed in the channel theory, where the health of the mind and body relied on the unobstructed flow of fluids, blood, tears, etc., throughout the body. A blockage in these vessels was believed to cause both physical illness and, in some cases, mental dysfunction. While the Edwin Smith papyrus is more focused on brain trauma and physical, empirical observation, the Ebers papyrus provides the most comprehensive record of how the ancient Egyptians documented and attempted to treat mental conditions. Ancient Egyptians contributed to the early foundations of psychology through what are believed to be some of the first recorded experiments aimed at understanding human nature, language, and behavior. While these practices were heavily intertwined with spiritual and magical beliefs, they included early forms of empirical, observational, and clinical methods. Here are the key contributions of the Egyptians to psychology through experiments and observation. 1. The first recorded psychological experiment, language acquisition. Psychology historians, such as Morton Hunt, credit the 7th century BCE Egyptian pharaoh Psamtik I, Psammetichus, with conducting what is considered the first recorded psychology experiment to determine the origin of language. The experiment. Psamtik I wanted to know if language was innate or learned, specifically if Egyptian was the original language of humanity. He ordered 2 newborns to be raised in isolation by a shepherd, who was instructed never to speak to them. The goal. The pharaoh hypothesized that the children would naturally begin to speak the original language, which he expected to be Egyptian, without outside influence. The result. The children reportedly uttered the word because, meaning bread, in Phrygian, at age 2. While the experimental design was severely flawed by modern ethical and scientific standards, it demonstrated an early attempt to use empirical observation to answer a fundamental question about human nature and innate capability. Ancient Greeks pioneered the foundations of psychology by shifting explanations for human behavior from divine intervention to natural, physical, and rational causes. Key contributions include identifying the brain as the seat of intelligence, developing early theories of personality and mental health, and introducing methods like introspection and systematic observation. Key contributions to psychology. Hippocrates' medical, physical approach argued that mental disorders have natural, physical causes rather than being punishments from gods. He proposed the theory of 4 humors to explain personality and temperament. Aristotle, behavioral, empirical foundation, considered a precursor to behaviorism. He believed the mind was a blank slate, nurture, filled by experience. He authored De Anima, one of the first systematic studies of the psyche, and developed the concept of catharsis, emotional release. Plato, rationalist, cognitive approach, proposed a tripartite soul, reason, emotion, appetite. He believed in innate knowledge and advocated for introspection, inward reflection, to gain understanding. Socrates' methodology emphasized the know thyself principle and developed the Socratic method of questioning, which influences modern therapeutic techniques. Physiological insights. Ancient Greeks like Alcmaeon and Herophilus identified the brain, rather than the heart, as the center of mental activity, distinguishing between motor and sensory nerves. Atomism. Democritus introduced materialist ideas, proposing that the mind was made of atoms, which laid the groundwork for biological psychology. Legacy. The Greeks coined the term psyche, soul or mind, and established the philosophical, biological, and empirical foundations for the scientific study of human behavior, thought, and personality. Psychology is the scientific study of mind and behavior. The word psychology comes from the Greek words psyche, meaning life, and logos, meaning explanation. Homer's epics, the Iliad and Odyssey, contributed to early psychology by pioneering the exploration of human passion, trauma, and consciousness. They introduced concepts of self-agency, the duality of emotional and rational thought, and early, metaphor-driven representations of the mind. Thymus. News. Psych. Homeric works provided a foundation for understanding warrior trauma and personal narratives. Key contributions include trauma and resilience. The Odyssey is studied for its portrayal of trauma, severe isolation, and the journey toward reclaiming agency. Psychological terminology. Homer used various terms for the mind, such as phrenes, intellect, thymos, passion, spirit, and nous, conscious perception, highlighting a complex, albeit nascent, understanding of mental functions. The heart, as agent, Odysseus's barking heart, Crady, serves as a metaphor for self-address and internal dialogue during moments of fear or conflict. Foundations for later psychology. Homeric models of passion and action influenced later philosophical concepts, such as Plato's tripartite soul. Narrative therapy parallels. The Odyssey's focus on storytelling. For healing foreshadows modern narrative therapy and cognitive behavioral approaches. Pre-self consciousness. Scholars like Bruno Snell in his 1953 book and Eric Robertson Dodds in 1951 studied Homer to argue that early Greek consciousness was based on externalized actions, divine intervention, rather than internal, self-driven psychology. The key soul words, mental, vital organs, thymus, thithamu, often translated as heart, spirit, or vital force. This is the most active mental organ in Homer. It is the seat of emotions, desire, impulse, and motivation. It is responsible for stirring a character to action and is often addressed directly by heroes, e.g., bear up, my thumos. Nous. Lo, nous. Associated with insight, intuition, mental vision, and intellectual comprehension. It is the capacity to grasp a situation or think through a problem, representing a person's mental essence. Frame. Phrenes, fuil, purine, often translated as mind, midriff, or diaphragm. This term refers to a physical location in the chest area where cognitive processes like reasoning, planning, and understanding occur. It is often used in the plural, phrenes. Psyche, pherhe, in Homer. This does not mean the soul, in the Christian or Platonic sense, but rather the breath of life that leaves the body at death. It is a shadow image. Aegelon, that goes to the underworld, lacking consciousness or strength unless revived by drinking blood. It is only active during unconsciousness. Fainting, or after death. Cardi, the heart, often used interchangeably with thumos to denote the seat of intense emotion, courage, or distress. Menu, often translated as might, rage, or vigor. It represents a temporary surge of energy or force, often divine, that propels a hero to extreme action. The Odyssey can be interpreted through a psychological lens as a profound, ancient exploration of the human mind, identity, and the process of recovering from trauma. It serves as a narrative for understanding coping mechanisms against fate or uncontrollable events, the psychological impact of social isolation, and the development of emotional intelligence. Key psychological themes in the Odyssey: trauma and recovery, Nostos. Both Odysseus and Penelope experience significant trauma, Odysseus through the loss of his men and his isolation at sea, and Penelope through the invasion of her home. The story of Nostos, homecoming, is fundamentally a process of recovering from this trauma and regaining a sense of self and safety. Learned helplessness and agency. The story highlights the psychological shift from helplessness to active agency. Odysseus on Ogygia and Telemachus in Ithaca both display signs of learned helplessness, a state of paralysis resulting from repeated, uncontrollable, and stressful experiences. The narrative focuses on overcoming this by developing active decision making, e.g., building the raft, standing up to suitors, emotional intelligence and regulation. Odysseus is frequently described as possessing high emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize and use emotions to navigate social situations, e.g., with Nausicaa and the Phaeacians. However, the plot also hinges on his failures to regulate his pride and anger, most notably when he taunts Polyphemus, which extends his suffering. Memory and deception. The poem explores memory as a reconstructive process rather than a passive recovery of facts. Odysseus's fake stories in the second half of the poem demonstrate how memories, real or false, are used for impression management, allowing him to test the loyalty of others while protecting his identity. Identity and social context. The story highlights how identity is constructed through narrative and social interactions. Odysseus must learn to navigate his return to society, his oikos, by managing his persona, moving from the identity of a warrior to that of a stranger, or beggar, before reclaiming his place as king. Archetypal perspectives, Jungian, individuation. The journey can be seen as a Jungian process of individuation, a personal, psychological journey of maturation and self-discovery. The anima, Odysseus's encounters with divine or magical women, Circe, Calypso, Athena, can be interpreted as confrontations with archetypal, unconscious aspects of the psyche, the anima, which, when integrated, lead to personal growth and development. The Odyssey as therapy. The Odyssey can be interpreted as a therapeutic model for coping with the exigencies of chance and fate. It provides a roadmap for navigating life's challenges, managing emotions, and finding meaning in suffering. The narrative serves as a mirror for the audience, helping them identify their own emotional, social, and psychological struggles in the characters. The Odyssey experience in modern life. Psychologically, an odyssey is often defined as a finite period of disengagement from the routines of life, followed by a transformation or regeneration. It mirrors a personal journey through adversity, requiring resilience, hope, and social support to overcome monsters, personal crises, or challenges. Key symbols and their psychological meanings. The sea, life's chaos, represents the unpredictable nature of life, chaos, and the obstacles, mental and physical, that test human endurance. Poseidon's wrath symbolizes the uncontrollable, chaotic forces of the psyche and nature. Ithaca, the self, home, symbolizes the inner home, fulfillment, and the ultimate goal of finding peace and stability. The olive tree bed, loyalty, marriage, the bed, carved into a living olive tree, symbolizes the unshakable, organic foundation of the marriage between Odysseus and Penelope. It represents stability and maturity, which cannot be moved. Odysseus's bow, identity and strength, represents his rightful place as king and his true identity. It symbolizes the restoration of order and the triumph of his intelligence over brute force. Penelope's shroud, cunning and control, symbolizes her intellect, devotion, and, most importantly, the control she maintains over her own destiny, mirroring her husband's wit. The Lotus Eaters, escapism, addiction, represents the desire to abandon responsibilities and escape the pain of reality through addiction or apathy. Circe and the Sirens, temptation, desire, embody the dangers of giving in to base, primitive desires, with Circe's transformation of men into pigs highlighting the bestial nature of ignoring one's purpose. The Iliad is a profound exploration of human psychology, focusing heavily on intense emotional experiences, the psychological impact of war, and the inner lives of its characters. It features a rich vocabulary of emotions, largely centered around the heart, and deals with themes of rage, grief, honor, and fate. Key psychological aspects of the Iliad include 1. The psychology of rage and grief. Achilles' rage, menace, the central theme is the catastrophic rage of Achilles, which stems from wounded pride, Time, after Agamemnon steals his war prize, Briseis. Narcissistic rage. Achilles' withdrawal from battle is analyzed as a defensive, narcissistic response to the destruction of his self-worth. Transformation through grief. The death of Patroclus shifts Achilles' rage into grief-driven vengeance, turning him into a monstrous force. Catharsis. The poem concludes with a moment of deep shared humanity, where Achilles' anger is finally calmed through empathy with Priam, bringing a catharsis of shared sorrow. 2. The impact of war on the human mind. War as dehumanization. Simone Weil's analysis suggests the epic shows how the force of war turns people into things, corpses, or objects, though this is countered by moments of profound humanity. Trauma registry. The Iliad acts as a detailed, realistic record of war trauma, covering 148 specific, mostly fatal injuries, reflecting the brutal reality of battle. Vulnerability and mortality. The characters are acutely aware of their mortality, which enhances their search for Clio's glory. The poem is a study in pathos, with scenes constantly highlighting the tragic loss of young lives, leaving behind mourning families. 3. Character psychology and internal conflict. Complex characters. Characters like Hector, Achilles, and Priam are portrayed with complex motivations, fears, and internal conflicts, rather than simple archetypes. Triangular desires. Desire often drives conflict, structured around the triangles of possession, such as the dispute over Briseis or the duel for Helen. The bicameral mind theory. Psychologist Julian Jaynes famously argued that the characters in the Iliad lack modern consciousness, acting instead on divine commands heard as voices. A theory based on the lack of internal, introspective language in the text. 4. Social and emotional dynamics. Honor and shame. The heroic code is built on the pursuit of honor and the fear of shame, which motivates characters to risk their lives. Friendship and love. The intense, potentially romantic, bond between Achilles and Patroclus drives the climax of the plot. Compassion. Elios. The poem explores the rare, precious capacity for compassion even in the midst of extreme violence, particularly in the final meeting between Achilles and Priam. The Iliad does not merely glorify war, but rather exposes its emotional, psychological, and social costs, exploring how humans struggle to maintain their humanity in a violent world. In Homer's Iliad, the tension between divine will and eternal will, fate, Moira, forms the core of the narrative's cosmic structure. The gods often act according to personal whims and biases, while they simultaneously operate within the constraints of a larger, unavoidable fate that even Zeus cannot fully alter. Socrates, circa 473–99 BC, pioneered psychology by shifting focus from cosmology to human subjectivity, ethics, and self-knowledge. He developed the Socratic method, a questioning technique for uncovering unconscious assumptions and fostering self-awareness, which directly prefigures modern cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. His emphasis on the examined life and moral reasoning established foundational concepts for understanding human motivation and mental functioning. Key contributions include the Socratic method, dialectic, a conversational approach using targeted questions to break down problems, uncover underlying assumptions, and develop insight. Foundations of cognitive therapy. His method of challenging irrational beliefs is considered a precursor to modern cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Self-knowledge and ethics, focused on the importance of examining one's own life, arguing that virtue is knowledge, and that self-awareness is essential for leading a good life. Subjectivity and introspection, shifted philosophical focus toward internal human experience, or knowing oneself. Psychological structure, via Plato, while Socrates wrote nothing himself. His dialogues recorded by Plato introduced the idea of a tripartite soul: rational, spirited, and appetitive. Elements. Socrates' focus on personal responsibility, moral development, and the pursuit of truth laid the groundwork for psychology as a study of the human mind. Plato's primary contribution to psychology is his tripartite theory of the soul, comprising reason, spirit, and appetite, which established a foundational model for understanding human motivation, internal conflict, and personality. He introduced concepts of mental health as a balanced soul, innate knowledge, and early, rational, and developmental approaches to psychology that influenced Western thought. Key aspects of Plato's contributions to psychology include tripartite soul. Plato divided the human psyche into three parts: the rational, reason; the irascible or spirited, emotions, will; and the appetitive, desires, needs. He argued that mental health and virtue arise from the harmony of these parts, with reason directing the others. Motivation and conflict. This model is used to explain human behavior and internal conflict, foreshadowing modern psychoanalytic concepts of inner struggles between competing drives. Innate knowledge, rationalism. Plato proposed that true knowledge is innate, residing within the mind, soul, and is not learned through experience. He believed that introspection, rather than just sensory observation, is necessary to unlock this latent knowledge. Concept of mental health. Plato was arguably the first to equate mental health with a well-ordered soul, suggesting that immorality is to the soul what disease is to the body. The allegory of the cave, a metaphor for human perception and cognition. This allegory suggests that people often mistake the shadows of reality, sensory input, for true reality, a concept relevant to cognitive psychology. And perception? Influence on later psychologists. His concepts influence Carl Jung's theory of archetypes and the tripartite model bears similarities to Freud's id, ego, and superego. Plato also emphasized the importance of early education and socialization in developing a person's character, highlighting the interplay between environment and natural aptitude. Aristotle, 384–322 BC, is considered a founding figure in psychology, bridging biology and philosophy to study the mind-body connection, memory, sensation, and emotion. In his seminal work De Anima, on the soul, he proposed a functional view of the soul, psyche, as the essence of life, integrating mental processes with physical, empirical observation rather than separating them. Key contributions include theory of the soul, psyche. Aristotle proposed three types of souls that define living things: vegetative, plants; growth, nutrition; sensitive, animals; sensation, movement; and rational, humans; thought, reason; empiricism and tabula rasa. Contrary to Plato, Aristotle believed knowledge is acquired through sensory experience and that the mind is a blank slate, tabula rasa, at birth, emphasizing the role of environment and experience in shaping personality. Memory and association. In Parva Naturalia, he explored how humans remember, proposing principles of association, including similarity, contrast, and contiguity. Mind-body holism. He argued that the soul and body are not separate entities, as in dualism, but rather that the soul is the form or function of the body. Emotions and motivation. Aristotle analyzed human emotions, like fear and anger, in Nicomachean Ethics, linking them to desire and rational thought. His emphasis on observation and the empirical study of mental phenomena makes him a crucial early precursor to modern psychology. Socrates and Aristotle established foundational, yet distinct, psychological perspectives. Socrates focused on the soul's pursuit of ethical, absolute knowledge, arguing that knowledge dictates action, while Aristotle proposed a functional, hylomorphic view where the soul is the first entelechy, active form, inseparable from the physical body. Socrates emphasized that virtue is knowledge, whereas Aristotle highlighted habits, desires, and the good life, eudaimonia, as central to psychology. Socrates' psychology, ethics, and the rational soul. The soul as self. Socrates equated the self with the soul, psyche, which is distinct from the physical body, though not necessarily immortal, as often argued by his student Plato. Knowledge and virtue. Socratic psychology argues that if one truly knows what is right, they will act rightly. Therefore, weakness of will, acrasia, is impossible. Methodology. He focused on ethics, self-knowledge, and the concept that the unexamined life is not worth living. Fatalism. Socratic analysis has been described as having a more monolithic, and at times fatalistic, view on human nature. Aristotle's psychology, functionalism, and hylomorphism. Hylomorphism. Aristotle rejected radical separation of body and soul, arguing that the soul is the form, shape, function, and the body is the matter. They are inseparable. Functionalism. In De Anima, on the soul, he defined the soul as the first entelechy, or the realization, function of a living body. Levels of soul. He proposed a hierarchy: the plant soul, reproduction, growth; the animal soul, appetite, motion; and the human soul, reason. Acrasia, weakness of will. Unlike Socrates, Aristotle argued that we can know what is right, but still fail to do it due to appetitive impulses or lack of habit, allowing for a more complex, realistic view of moral failure. Eudaimonia. His psychology is inherently goal-oriented toward achieving eudaimonia, human flourishing. Key differences. Unity versus structure. Socrates viewed the soul as a relatively unified ethical entity, while Aristotle structured the soul into functional parts: vegetative, sensitive, rational. Action. Socrates believed knowledge equals action, intellectualism. Aristotle believed knowledge plus habits equals action, behavioral, rational. Body relation. Socrates separates body, soul. Aristotle fuses them through hylomorphism. Hippocrates, circa 400 BCE, the father of medicine, revolutionized psychology by proposing that mental and physical health derived from natural causes, the balance of four bodily humors, rather than divine punishment. He identified the brain as the center of cognition and emotion, linking personality and mental disorders to the bodily fluids. Key components of Hippocratic psychology. Humoral theory. Four temperaments. Hippocrates believed that personality and temperament were determined by the predominance of one of four fluids: sanguine, blood; cheerful, active, and optimistic; choleric, yellow bile; argumentative, energetic, and passionate; melancholic, black bile; analytical, quiet, and prone to sadness, depression; phlegmatic, phlegm; calm, reliable, and unemotional. Brain as the center of mind. Hippocrates argued that the brain is the seat of intelligence, emotion, and mental illness, stating, "From the brain, and from the brain only, arise our pleasures, joys, laughter, and jests, as well as our sorrows, pains, griefs, and tears." Classification of mental disorders. He was among the first to classify mental illnesses, including mania, melancholia, paranoia, panic, and phrenitis, treating them as medical conditions rather than supernatural phenomena. Holistic approach. Hippocrates emphasized understanding the whole person, including environmental factors, diet, and lifestyle, in treating both physical and mental ailments. His work laid the essential groundwork for biological psychology and psychiatry by replacing superstitious explanations with observational science. Traditional Chinese contributions to psychology, deeply rooted in holistic, Confucian, and Taoist philosophies, emphasize the interconnection of body and mind, relational self-conception, and harmony with nature. Key contributions include conceptualizing health through energy channels, meridians, emphasizing contextualized social behavior over individualism, and developing unique therapeutic methods that integrate mind, body, and nature. Often with roots in traditional medicine. Key areas of traditional Chinese psychological contributions include holistic body-mind philosophy. Unlike Western separation, Chinese thought views physical and mental health as inseparable, with emotions influencing bodily organs and vice versa. Relational self, social psychology, Confucianism shapes a person in culture perspective, where identity is defined by social roles, relationships, and responsibilities, leading to a methodological relationalism in research. Dialectical and intuitive thinking. Traditional Approaches favor holistic, intuitive, and dialectical, or contradictory, thinking over pure analytical or empirical approaches. Embodied cognition. Traditional concepts, often derived from mythology and philosophy, emphasize that the mind is embodied, focusing on the body human beings, things, gods. Framework. Well-being and morality. Happiness is viewed as a blend of personal moral cultivation, familial duty, and social harmony, rather than just individual gratification. These traditions, particularly in their modern, indigenous psychology form, focus on understanding behaviors in their original cultural context.